US really had evidence that Iranians had killed 200 odd of their soldiers, as they claimed in January, they would be hitting back. Mahan Abdeen, Center for the Study of Terrorism and Violence.
Welcome back to Inside Iraq. Today we are discussing the latest US accusations against Iran that they are targeting American troops in Iraq, with Kamil Wazni, author and political analyst from Lebanon, with Lawrence Kolb from the Center for American Progress, and with Mr. Harvey. Mr. Harvey, perhaps we should continue the story about the EPF and the IEDs. There is a genesis to it. Back in 2003, Hezbollah, apparently, according to Mr. Goskell, a senior analyst of security matters, offered its services to the Iraqi insurgency and to the resistance. And they said, no, thank you, we don't need it. And perhaps even before that, back in 1995, Saddam Hussein, it seems, apparently sent some of his people to Hezbollah to learn about the IEDs. Now, sprint forward to 2005, 2006. Why did Hezbollah get into it again?
Well, I'm going to go back even further than you did. In fact, it was the IRA battling against the British who developed IEDs, in fact, light-triggered devices. So there is a genesis that stretches back much further than you imagine. But I think that what is happening currently, first of all, it's in the neocon agenda to demonize the Iranians, and that's understandable. Because a lot of these reports at the moment, not just Mr. Dunduck, but there is, I think, playing to the home audience in the United States, possibly as a precursor to whatever sanctions are in fact imposed on Iran. And there's hardly any surprise that, first of all, going back to the Iraq-Iranian conflict, that the Iranians have had a particular interest supporting their Shiite brothers in the south. And there is a certain equilibrium when Hezbollah are invoked in this particular instance. I think there's no question that materiel is coming across the Iranian-Iraqi border in the south. The only thing is, I have to ask, is this officially Iranian government sanctioned supplies, or is it black market? Is it individual enterprise?
Let me stop you here for just a second, Mr. Harvey, and I'll pose that question to Mr. Kolb. In the presentation we heard from Brigadier Bergner, he said, I will be extremely surprised if the Iranian leadership did not know about it. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't think there's a unified Iranian leadership, and that's part of the problem in dealing with Iran. As we know, President Ahmadinejad... Could that
confusion be deliberate, perhaps turning a blind eye to a lower set of commanders to do what they're exactly doing, knowing full well what the leadership wants?
Yeah, I think we've seen that in Iran over the years. I mean, even with President Khatami, he could do certain things and then he would get pulled back. So I think there may be some parts of the Iranian government that are complicit in this. We don't know who and how much, and we don't know, for example, whether, as Mr. Harvey just said, whether this is black market or whether it's people in Iraq now who lived in Iran during the regime of Saddam who are able to, exploit their own contacts.
At the end of the day, if these set of information are presented to the White House and to the National Security Advisor, Mr. Kolb, does it make much difference to President Bush whether Khamenei knew about it or whether it's a top commander is behind it?
No. I mean, to President Bush, you want to demonize Iran. I mean, basically, that's what you're trying to do, because you have a whole host of other issues with Iran, including their movement toward developing nuclear weapons and the sanctions that you want to put on, that you want to get the support of the international community. So the more you can demonize Iran, the better it will be. What the president fails to acknowledge is that in 2003, after the Iranians had helped us in Afghanistan, they offered to sit down and talk to us about a whole host of issues. We decided not to. You had the president's axis of evil speech, and there's no doubt in my mind that that energized some sectors in the Iranian government to decide that they would not allow the United States to quote-unquote win in Iraq and use that as a launching pad to come into Iran. So they'll do what they have to do to keep the United States bogged down in Iraq.
That is one set of analysis, Kamil Wazni. The other one is, actually it comes from the Iraqi government. Hoshyar Zebari, the foreign minister, he said, we told the Iranians time and time again about our concern and about what is coming across from the border. What do you think?
Well, I think the Iranians been very supportive of the Iraqi people, of the Iraqi causes, and they want stability in Iraq and they want stability in the region. But because of the interest of the American, because of oil and what oil can play in the international arena as a bargaining tool to push the enemies of the United States, America is putting all their forces in the Persian Gulf, in the Arab world. They're trying to control these resources at the expense of everything. And the one who's causing all this havoc and instability is the greedy of the United States. The United States have to understand they cannot really use Iraq or the oil to push China and Russia. And they cannot use the stories as Hezbollah and the Iranian to justify their miscalculation and entering the war in the first place. The blame stopped with Bush, with Cheney, with that team who brought the war to Iraq, who caused all this casualty in Iraq. There's some reports talk about American killing over a couple 100,000 Iraqi people. Who take responsibility of these crimes? Doesn't that count in the international community, in the international
law? Thank you, Kamil. Mr. Harvey, it was by no accident that we placed you in the middle of the show between Lebanon and the United States. As a dispassionate analyst, you know, two words when it comes to Iraq and Iran and the United States. One is stability, as mentioned by Kamil Wazni. The other one is chaos. How do you look at this projection that Iran, one set of people say they want stability in Iraq, and another group of analysts, they said they want chaos in order to drive Uncle Sam out of the region?
Well, I do go for the former, that undoubtedly people do want stability, but along the way, the chaos theory does apply. Because the United States, and indeed the coalition troops, Britain is linked with that. The old adage about, you know, if you're in a hole, stop digging. Well, I don't think that advice is being followed. On the other hand, our colleague from Beirut, I think, is more than naive if he thinks that Iran and other countries in the region are doing absolutely nothing to aggravate the situation, that the troubles are all left at the foot of Uncle Sam. If we look at the tragic daily toll of people killed by car bombs in Baghdad or in other places, daily insurgents do this. Now, are these crimes Muslim on Muslim perpetrated by Uncle Sam? I don't think so.
Let me ask perhaps the final question to Mr. Korb. In his presentation on Monday, Bergner said, you know, this training by Hezbollah is not only targeted against the American soldiers, but against also the Iraqis. How does it make sense that Iran, which wants to support al-Maliki government, attacks, or its operative attacks, Iraqi troops, which are part of the Iraqi government?
Well, I think what Iran wants to do is get the United States out of that area, and by not only attacking Americans but some Iraqis, the hope is that the Iraqi people will say the United States is part of the problem and get us out of there. In fact, the opinion polls show that almost 70% of the Iraqis think that the United States is responsible for the violence. So as long as this continues and stays at a high level, I think there'll be more pressure from the Iraqi people for the Americans to leave. So I think that's what Iran is playing a dangerous game. They want to have enough chaos to get us out. They don't want to have enough chaos that it becomes a failed state, and they're going to have to be very careful about how they play this, because it could lead to Iraq becoming a failed state, causing all kinds of long-term problems for Iran.
Lawrence Korb, Glenn Mortrenier Harvey, and Kamil Wazni, gentlemen, Thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq. To access the show and to send us your comments, please go to aljazeera.net/English. We have reached the end of this show. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Goodbye.